live! Hey everyone, this is our next to last SPSM wrapping up season 3. I know that we are not on the Doc Foreman YouTube channel, we're on a different YouTube channel. That is... hey everyone, this is our next to last... Yep, there you go. That's what I get for not hitting mute on that. So, we are not on a regular channel. That is because something about how I titled one of the live hangouts has caused my regular channel to be under review for live streaming because I talk about season 3 and movie picks. Obviously, YouTube, we are not broadcasting anything but our original content. But until that is resolved with YouTube, we are going to be streaming from this channel. If you click the link, you should be good. We have a wonderful guest tonight. I'm very excited. We have an SPSM alum, actually really two, who are going to be discussing LifeWIRE, which we've talked about in the past, which has some new functions. And, of course, Dr. Glen Coppersmith is coming back. So we're really going to be talking about the issues that are involved in generating data and data insights, using symptom tracking and using functionality tracking in a way that clinical psychology hasn't done before. And this is really important and a wonderful follow-up to what Patrina Labs was talking about in terms of cross-discipline ways to look at suicide prevention and recovery. But before we go to that, today has been a really tragic day, and we can't not address what's happened in Orlando. And there was some thought about what we wanted to say about that. I know there were some tweets in the SPSM feed about that and some tweets in my feed about that. This is the largest terrorist attack in the United States since 9/11 and the largest mass shooting in the United States. Specifically, it's a murder-suicide. These are horrible events, and our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers are with the survivors and the family of this horrible shooting. I know that some of the members of the SPSM community live in Orlando and have lost people that they know, and I'm terribly sorry, as are we all. With our mission in mind, we are going to continue to talk about what we can do to start to get better data to understand suicide and to understand these events. This is why I've brought to you some of the best data science experts and the best experts in developing tools that can help us potentially change the field of suicide prevention and eliminate suicide as a public health problem. I am at Doc Foreman. You can tweet me at Doc Foreman. You can follow the hashtag SPSM on Twitter. Next week will be our very last SPSM, but it's going to be a blab, and we are going to chat about movie parties and hashtag SPSM Summer and all the cool things. I also found out this week there's hashtag SPSM quotes because Bart Andrews and Chris Maxwell. And so I hope that you will be following all that stuff. But this is our last sort of live stream this way. I'm going to introduce our IT producer, Mr. Tony Wood.
It is impossible to follow the Orlando tragedy because it has taken us all so much by surprise and is such a such a striking example of the importance of the kind of work that we are all trying to do with suicide prevention and social media. How to lighten it up, I don't know, but we will do our darndest as we talk about the technology that surrounds the issue.
And if you have questions, if you have comments, if you need to get something to our speakers, please do tweet at Tony Wood, and please do use the hashtag SPSM. Please do like us on Facebook. That's where you're going to get updates about all the cool content that's coming in different ways. Our next commentator, both of our returning commentators are SPSM alums, Dr. Glen Coppersmith. Glen, say hello to folks and tell them about Quantify.
Hey everybody, it's good to see all of you again. Well, it's good to see a couple of you and more of you on the Twitters. I'm the founder and CEO of Quantify, which is a small company doing tech and mental health stuff. And so most people these days call me a data scientist. My background's in psychology, but I've had professor appointments in math and statistics and engineering and stuff like that. So I'm one of these people sort of bridging the gap And so I know we've talked recently about things like ourdatahelps.org and the collection of data and wide streams of data. So I'm super psyched to be on here and talking with the LiveWire Connect and all the data sets that they're looking at, about to dive into. It's super exciting. So thank you guys for having me on.
Tell them a little bit about your shirt, Glenn, and Miss Sarah Schuster, who's going to be on SPSM in the fall.
Fantastic. This is shout out to Sarah. Thank you for all of your all the work that you've done over a good long while. She sent us some mighty shirts after we did some work together, writing up a piece about Our Data Helps. And so this is I love this T-shirt too. Like, by the way, the mighty T-shirts are really quite amazing. Very, very soft. Very soft.
To you news media outlets, if you would send us more cool shirts, we would submit to more interviews. I'm just saying. Everybody, I'm really excited to reintroduce our SPSM alum, Howard Rosen, who is here from LifeWire. We are bringing LifeWire back because things have happened. And these are things that are really interesting. And the reason that Glenn is here is we're really talking about generating new data sets. We had some new people on the chat. One of the tweets was, like, they're saying that the suicide rate is up. What is this all about? And the answer is, we don't really know for sure. We have some guesses, but we don't really know. One of the big problems with doing any kind of mental health research is getting really good data. And unlike even 5 years ago, the opportunity to sort of turn the corner on that program is here. And so I'm going to introduce Howard Rosen, who's the CEO of LifeWire. I'm going to let him remind us a little bit about what LifeWire is about, which is super cool. By the way, for any folks watching from work, you know who you are. I'm not affiliated with LifeWire. I just think it's neat. I have no financial dog in this fight, as I obviously don't in any of SPSM. But I want Howard to come on and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, hey, everybody. Hi, April. Thanks again for inviting me back. Very quickly, what LifeWire is, it's a cloud, the technical reference, it's a cloud-based communication platform that provides asynchronous communication. In real language, what that means is LifeWire allows a provider to communicate with a vet. The vet can communicate back. It's all interactive. It's responsive to the responses. So if it's asking, how do you feel today, you respond, let's say 1 to 5, 1 being great, 5 being lousy, and however you respond, it responds back to that response, specific to your personal needs. So if you respond with a 5 saying you're feeling lousy, and say, sorry you feel that way, why don't you make yourself a cup of tea? The reason it says a cup of tea is because that's your specific de-escalator. So it personalizes the interaction, so it gives you exactly what's valuable to you. And at the same time, it'll send a message to the provider or to a loved one or to a buddy to say, just, Howard's feeling lousy right now. So it has a full outreach capability, but it's truly a dialogue. It's not designed to be pedantic. It's not designed to be one size fits all. It's designed to personalize the results for you and gives you feedback as you need it. And
now, wait a minute. Is this the Jetsons?
The Jetsons can only wish they were what we do.
Now, one of the things that's particularly interesting about LifeWire is that I see a lot of things that are designed, that they're often designed using technology that's super expensive, it's hard to get to, and there's some particular things that are good, that are clever about LifeWire design, including that it's going to work with SMS, and also that it really uses a secure web portal. And I want you to talk about how people are generating this data and how clinicians are accessing it. This ends up being tremendously important.
Well, the key thing, and thank you for reminding me, the key thing to this is there's not any software required, because we want people to use it. To use it, you don't want to take away any barriers. So we're not going to tell you how to communicate. We're not going to tell you you have to use an iPhone or whatever. Whatever device you have, however you want to communicate is going to work. It's because, as I mentioned earlier, it's cloud-based. That means it works with whatever native system you have on whatever you use. So if it's a cell phone, it'll work for your cell phone. If it's a tablet, it'll do emails. And communicate however you want to communicate. Or switch. If you want to do text for a while, you want to switch to email, switch. If you want to do an IM, an instant message, you'll do an instant message. We don't want utilization to be the barrier to a good dialogue. And so go ahead.
So let's be really clear that that a lot of times when these systems are designed, you've got to use sort of the one system with the one app that may be available on your phone that won't talk to your clinician. And the design for this really sort of overcomes that. It works much like many of the technology tools that we use in our personal lives. where they're really, is the word agnostic, Glenn, am I going to get that word right?
Agnostic sounds good. I like it.
Agnostic and ubiquitous. How's that?
Right. It's the SATs here on SPSM. So this is, I will say this, having been, and we've talked about this occasionally on SPSM, I'm a clinician who has road tested technology tools with patients at high risk of suicide with very complex and severe mental health problems. We do this because the adherence rates for using technology to track symptoms and communicate are really much, much higher. Because the issue is stopping, making phone calls, taking messages, returning phone calls, charting your mood on a graph on pencil and paper. A lot of those things just have always had poor response rates. And so there are all sorts of, we've generated all sorts of talking interventions to improve how often our patients stay in touch with us when they're suicidal, because one of the things that happens when you're at risk of suicide is you start withdrawing from people. If you relapse on drugs and you're suicidal, you don't call your therapist, you avoid your therapist, you miss your appointments, lots of stuff happens. And the thing that is, I think, particularly good about a design like LifeWIRE's is that simply it's just easier for people to stay in touch with their clinician. And also, my understanding is we could probably use data that LifeWIRE generates to say, hey, their response patterns become irregular, you should check on them. Like, that becomes interesting in and of itself without someone having to actually, when they're at their worst in terms of functioning, take action to seek me out, right?
Well, actually, yes, and actually the first version of that was a whole issue when you deal with communication, is the first question that comes up is, well, what if someone doesn't respond? Well, the reality is a non-response is a choice not to respond. So a non-response is actually a response. It's a choice not to respond. So we measured non-responses. So the first tool we gave the clinicians is they can set the rule set, or the patient, the vet, what is a non-response threshold. So they don't respond to 2 messages. The system kicks in and sends a message to the individual. It sends a message to their social network, obviously all permission-based, to say, just Howard hasn't responded to his message. The next iteration of that, and April alluded to it, is with the data that we're collecting. That's a variety of things. How quickly do people respond to messages, whether it's an email, an IM, or a text message? We're realizing there's a wealth of data in there, which is, well, what if there's changes to response patterns? Forget the responses themselves, but just the response patterns. And we're just starting to learn that there's value in there. We don't know quite what they are. We have some indications what they are, but this is sort of the tip of the iceberg, which has led to us going even further to what we are. And if it's okay, April, let's start talking about it, which is looking at the wearable side of things.
Good, because I was wanting to get to that, but I don't want to get to too soon. That's the part that really excites me. So, sorry. So one of the things that I saw, like I do a lot of, I have a lot of social media feeds that I'm sort of always checking for news on healthcare wearables, and there's also there are different subreddits about this, and Mashable and BuzzFeed will cover some of this, and then like subreddit Futurology, honestly cover. Like there are places that I go. And so, did you guys see? I know I sent it to some people, but it's a wearable for predicting your heart attack. Have you seen this? And it's like a little thing that like sort of sticks right here, right?
You don't have to show us exactly where it is, April. You can keep your clothes on. It's okay. We get the idea. Yes.
SPSM, unpacked.
Someone has to do Bart's job because
no,
clearly that was why I'm here, right?
So basically, it's like sticks to your chest. It's like 1 inch by 4 inches, like, and it's disposable. Like you can stick it on. I even saw a wearable that was for scanning brains and that attaches to my phone that can be done in 10 minutes after concussion to see if there's been a TBI. And they're having to test that because there's no test like it. They don't like. The test is new to the technology and new to the phone. There's not a hospital test for this or anything. So like, let's say that somebody is in a car accident or they've been hit very hard in a football game, they can stick this on, they can attach it to the phone, and they can get wearable information about people's health care. Now, when I have talked with folks in the past, Howard, folks that we're not naming because we have standards of SPSM, and we have talked about wearables, what I've been told is that this is where we think the answer is, but it's just like it can't be done, the data's not going to be great. you know, it's one of those deals that people say, but the reality is that it's too many APIs, and it's just, it's, you know, it's sort of brr, 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 brr. What isn't that a lovely pipe dream? And so I was pretty excited when you announced what you're about ready to announce.
Well, some people's pipe dreams are other people's realities, I guess.
Right.
And I, you know,
Well said.
And we kind of, you know, because as you know, I don't come from healthcare or HIT, so I don't know any better. So if I look at something and we want to try something, we just go ahead and do it. We don't know enough not to do something. And so I'm
sure that it's wrong, and there's an ethics board somewhere.
Well, they keep on trying.
So tell us a little bit about what LifeWIRE is doing in terms of wearables and the data around wearables.
Well, what we're looking to do, just as we're collecting through LifeWIRE, as I described, predominantly qualitative kind of data. What we're looking at the wearables is quantitative data. It's a Fitbit, so it's heart rate, it could be number of steps you've taken, exercise, whatever the case may be. And what the proposition is very simple. By taking the qualitative we collect, and looking at quantitative data from a wearable, you create what we call the 3D data patient. You create insight for an individual that's like a fingerprint that's so unique for that individual. And you put those pieces together, it just adds a whole three-dimensional data set on any individual, whatever condition you're dealing with. And again, the hypothesis is you measure all these pieces together are going to provide brand new insight. Just as we do with LifeWIRE, when you're looking at what we call triangulating, where you're intervening with the vet, but you also talk with their spouse. You may ask the same question about, and you're going to get two different responses. That allows you to get a whole new insight for that individual. We're looking with the wearables, the quantitative data, to add just a whole new set of insight that doesn't exist today.
Because insight in mental health is not the same as insight in data, and I'm gonna actually punt this to Glen to comment. So one of the things that's happening, Howard, is you're talking about collecting large data sets. So data sets that people are texting in about their behavior, data sets about response time. And one of the great things that you learn at the beginning of becoming a clinician, because you freak out when they're training you to be a clinician. They're like, what if they do this? What if they do that? What if they don't respond? And they literally said this to me, and this is sort of in the day where email was still a questionable thing. They're like, everything that someone does is data. That was literally said to me my very first weeks of supervision in clinical psychology, or counseling psych, actually. But anyways, that's what you know. Anyway, so in counseling psych, everything that some patient does is data. And so now we mean that really literally, and we have people interacting so much with their phones in ways that are really meaningful about their health. And that we might be able to get something called a data insight. But this is not where I realized that I married my mother. We're not talking about a therapy insight.
No.
Glenn, what are we talking about when we talk about data insights?
That's exactly right. So the chasm between data and insight or knowledge or information is often quite large, and it gets larger the larger the data, the larger the chasm. And so some of the stuff that's coming off of the Fitbits, in particular, the Fitbit HR, I suspect is what you're talking about. And there's just a ton of data that's coming off of that, and you look at it in its raw form, and it doesn't tell you a whole lot. But what you're getting at is exactly the key from the data science world, is to take some quantitative data and some qualitative data and try to look at these things together. And so each of these things has their flaws, and each of these things is biased in some way, and there's some self-report happening on the qualitative side, and it's just raw numbers on the quantitative side, which is biased in a different way, right? Oh, I forgot to charge my Fitbit. You know how often I forget to charge my Fitbit, right?
Like those competitions where you try to get your steps in, like at the office with your Fitbit. The people are like hooking them up to like cordless drills or attaching the dogs or ceiling fans in order to get all their steps in. Like there could be error.
There is error. Let's just say that right there. It's quantitative. It may be noisy data, but it in aggregate is super, super useful. Because what you actually care about is not did you do 10,000 or 10,300 steps today, but it's how is this week compared to last week. And this is exactly what Howard was talking about. It's not even you. It's not you compared to the rest of the population even. It's you compared to you previously. And so what you really are able to get out of some of this stuff is what's the trajectory that someone is tracing out. Are they doing better on some measure or not? And so the Fitbit in particular, the one that he's talking about here, the heart rate data is just it is rough, and I mean the Fitbit is being sued because some of the stuff, somebody's making claims that it's not accurate enough for something, but the fact of the matter is it's capturing something about heart rate data. It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be exactly right, as long as it's systematic. And so this is actually the...
Be right, it just has to be systematic.
Yes.
Howard, go ahead and follow up with that. I see it on your face.
Well, it's systematic, but it's also, it really, following up with Glenn, this is going to be a show where Glenn and I just agreeing with each other, I think. But it's basically, you're looking at a relative scale. It doesn't matter how accurate it is. It's accurate for that individual on a relative scale. It's going to be accurate for their purpose. And the baseline will be the same, and it's just a matter of working, you're looking at for that individual. It's going to be different for everyone. So the accuracy is less important than how they respond on an ongoing basis. And looking at it retrospectively and going forward. So it becomes very valuable for predicting forward. When you're adding these different pieces, you want to have more factors in there. 2 factors going forward is hard. You start putting more pieces in there, you can actually start building a case for.
Yeah, I'm going to be the voice of reason.
Wow.
I'm going to be the voice of the irrationality of the mental health field. But wait a minute, we haven't done 3 studies about correlation with 2 factors or whatever published at this particular school, so we can't ever use that in a therapy setting. This is bad. This is dangerous. If we collect all this data, it's wrong. We're not sure why it's wrong, but it's wrong, right? Which is honestly the reaction that you see a lot of folks sort of from the old guard had. So what's going to happen? Like, we're collecting data to build data insights and look at patterns, but the truth is that collecting the data is not the same as having a valid measure. It's really not.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So what then?
Well, Glenn, feel free to jump in, but to me, we're looking at really early days on the ability, the first thing is just the ability to do something. The ability is collecting these data. And we're starting to build the case, and there are groups out there with the individuals, but obviously it has to be permission-based. So you're starting with the patient, the vet. They've got to give permission, understand the circumstance of what the collection is going to be. And some clinicians who are willing to work that and start just building this out to get this sense of what's happening.
So the big issue is we're not going to know until we know. We're not going to be able to start that journey until someone somewhere starts collecting the data. No one, by the way, in order to have data about our shopping habits, had to pass an IRB.
Right.
I wasn't going to say that one. Yes, preach on, April. I've got another point after that, but I want to hear you make that point again and again.
Nobody, in order to manipulate our behavior around our shopping habits, had to pass an IRB, and let me tell you, that affects my bank account every month, Amazon.
They get you too, huh?
Oh, they're just so good at it.
I know!
Like 3 times a week, the bastards, and it's always so helpful and low prices that come straight to my door.
2 days.
Streaming videos.
And you give it a little bit, it'll be there in your house in 2 hours because I got a drone that's going to drop it off for you.
Drones, so bad. So let's talk a little bit about like what we're going to do with either Glenn or Howard, or actually both of you. So we can't do any research. We can't know what matters until we just start to look at it. And in other fields like advertising or like using social media data or data science about our behaviors with our computers to get information about our shopping habits, there are whole industries built around understanding our behavior and nudging our behavior certain ways with data from interacting with our phones. But for some reason we believe it's too dangerous to do this for people's health. Don't ask me why. So, cause I won't have a good reason for that, at Doc Foreman. But Glenn, Howard, what would we do that would show that we were really good actors? Like, what's LifeWIRE doing with these data sets? What's Quantify doing with these data sets? What are the responsible ways as we're getting this data and trying to build these insights? What are the things that we're doing that definitely make this ethical, that make this like show that we're behaving responsibly and are good actors?
So I want to say one other piece of this before we get straight to the ethics, which I do have a lot to say on. This has traditionally been thought of in the abstract, and like there is a potential danger to a person. This is where a lot of the IRB sort of stuff seems to come from. There is a potential danger to a person, and therefore we should move slowly and cautiously and make sure that that all the ducks are in a row and that all these procedures are in place and that we fully understand everything before we're gonna. There are people dying. There's a lot of people dying, And so there is the other side of this, I think, is really coming out, and I know within this group we talk about it frequently, that there's a real cost to that caution. And I don't think that throwing all the IRB stuff to the wind is the right answer at all. There's some happy medium middle ground that's going to be possible, where we can say, look, we need to be able to move fast on some of these things. If we're designing...
People can volunteer their data. They can volunteer to participate, right?
Exactly. So I think we can all agree that there are some... And there's actually some relatively recent paper out talking that the public tends to agree with these statements as well, that if we're talking about public data that is aggregated so that you can't identify an individual, that's a reasonable way to look at data. And the other way to look at this sort of data is opt-in. So if someone has volunteered their data and said, please analyze it, right? Or please intervene in this way that you've stated, they're
aggregate the data. We can opt in. There's also something called fuzzing, which sounds a little dirty.
There are worse things that we could do. I think fuzzing is a really good one.
So what is data fuzzing?
So if you imagine that you're looking at a data set and it's in sharp relief and it's very clearly focused, right? And you can see exactly everything. You can see the timestamp that this thing was posted down to the nanosecond. And you could see the GPS coordinate down to the 6 inches or whatever it is. That there is that you could probably identify where someone lives from that. You could probably identify some things about a person from that. So there are things that you can do to the data set that allow you to do some science while protecting that. And so
you mean data that's very identifying that there are statistical things that can be done to the data to make it anonymous. And that's called fuzzing.
Make it more anonymous. And so anonymous is a spectrum. It's not a binary thing.
Sort of like gender identity and sexual orientation? Yes. I'm sorry, but the clinicians will understand that.
Mm-hmm. And so you can do some things. You can imagine it's like if we had fuzzed out Glen a little bit, and you had basically taken the pixels that represent my face right now. Let me stay still for a second. If you'd taken all these pixels and replaced a chunk of them here with whatever the average color is, and a chunk of them here with whatever the average color is, you'd never be able to identify me. You'd be able to identify that I was wearing a red shirt in a blue room with perhaps a white door behind me, wearing some black things, but you would be able to see that it was me. And so is that enough to support whatever scientific questions you're asking? Maybe. And so if this is done thoughtfully, then you can actually maintain some anonymity for the people that are involved while still allowing the science to go forward. And so there's
life-saving science that happens, and people's anonymity is reasonably well protected because, once again, Amazon has not cared about your anonymity. No. They have gotten me to buy a lot of beauty supplies.
They make money. They make money on that side.
So I'm not anonymous, and they profit off of me?
Well, no, it could very well be with you because they got a special department probably set up.
So tell us a little bit about what LifeWire is doing in terms of data security and in terms of collecting this information, because you really are getting idiosyncratic sort of, and I hate to say fingerprints, but that's a good analogy. You could get sort of idiosyncratic sort of fingerprints. When I was doing mood monitoring, what I pay attention to in terms of cycle symptoms, improvement, decompensation is pretty specific to each patient. And you're saying LifeWire could do that. So what are some of the ways that you're managing the data?
Well, fundamentally, it was actually the cybersecurity conference last week talking a bit about what we do. That sounds much more impressive than you think it would be. But it was. But what we do is we actually don't know who we have on our system. We've actually, this way we've taken this approach is we created this, for lack of a term, a firewall between ourselves and the clinical groups and the patients. So we are 100% de-identified. We have IDs that are provided by the providers of that individual. We don't know whether male, female. We don't have any sense of socioeconomic demographics whatsoever. The data is fed to the clinician, so it goes to that side. They do whatever analysis they want to do. We do some, but again, it's 100% on a de-identified basis. So we do not have any information. And because our system is designed where there's no software required by anybody, there's no way for us even to gather any data about anybody because there isn't any software in the first place. So it's truly designed to not allow. And
I apologize because I don't understand what that means enough. So I'm gonna require some translation. So what does that mean by because there's no software? it's anonymous. I don't understand that. Maybe you
just adds to the comfort of the anonymity, because a lot of software apps you pull down can grab data about an individual and forward it to whomever has that data. If you've got an app that can pull data.
Oh, okay. So if I have an app, it's collecting data.
It can collect data.
Glenn, can you help?
Sure. So I'm guessing here, Howard, tell me if I'm right or wrong here, that there is no because of there isn't something running on the person's phone or on their personal piece of computing. This is what you're talking about, that there's no software. There is software in the back end that's doing a bunch of stuff to keep all the wires straight and getting the data to the right clinician and back to the right. So there is software somewhere, which may be part of the confusion here, April. But there's nothing on the person's phone that could, in a way that your Candy Crush or whatever your games are sucking up information about you and your behavior.
My games are sucking up information about me? My words with friends must think I'm very dirty. Okay, so this is for the lay folks. This is for the mental health folks who are with me. So all of those things that we have, the programs on our computer, the apps on our phone, those things are collecting data about this. How
some of them.
This about LifeWIRE is that because this is it's about the conduit of information, but the information isn't living on a device, and because of that, there's some security and anonymity related to that. Do I understand that?
That's great. Additional on top of the fact that everything's de-identified, so there's no information about an individual whatsoever. It's all off of IDs provided by the VA if it's veterans, or DOD if it's active duty. It's just an ID number.
Or if you ever did this with a clinician not in DOD, VA, or something like that. So that there's an identifier, and I as a clinician know who I'm talking about, and hopefully, I mean, the clinical end of this is that I would have to develop a process for how I am documenting that data in the medical record and how I'm using that data to make clinical decisions, but that's on me. What you're saying is technology really does allow for exchange of information, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm assuming in sort of an encrypted way, so that LifeWIRE is getting some really de-identified data sets that might be useful, or I might be able to get some in the aggregate about my caseload. But it's not living on a device, so that having that information stolen is much harder, or stolen and used in a way that I would not approve of is much harder.
And so what they would get in the worst case scenario is that whatever data was being passed between Doc Foreman and one of her patients would be person number 278948484. What does that mean? I don't know. It's not going to help anybody get back to the actual person in the real world. And so that's what is being talked about. The de-identification that's going on there is the only thing that you're seeing is the actual, and I suspect I don't have internal view of their software, but I suspect it is encrypted in a way that it is secure between device to LifeWIRE to the clinician and back again. And the only thing that's identifying you is that unique identifier, that number, that random string that they've attached to you. That's and correct. The clinician knows who you are because of that, but that's it.
So how do we get it right?
So I just want to add in, just to Glen's earlier point, also it's specifically opt-in for an individual has to actually not only say they want to do it, the system actually has a lock on it. LifeWIRE is actually locked until an individual says they want to use the system to communicate. And that's the only time it actually gets activated. And it's just a message back and forth. But the actual individual has to literally opt into the system for it to start working for the individual.
Speaking of data that you can get in the aggregate, so we know that most breaches of patient health data are not technical breaches. Most of them are things like talking in the elevator, like they're not, or giving records to people I should not give records to. I have not done that, but like that's really, you're way more likely to misuse PHI in the elevator than you ever are like in a system like LifeWIRE. But you do get some healthcare data sort of in aggregate, and I know we talked about this last time, but the numbers are stunning, and I want you to remind people what the recovery numbers are, so that when LifeWIRE collects data where they're staying in touch with people, not only do you have data about effectiveness of interventions, but we know that the presence of being able to stay connected and track things and respond to behavior is improving outcomes. Can you talk a little bit about what the outcomes are?
There's a variety. In terms of substance use, in some certain groups that we've measured, with the control groups were 30% relapse, we're down to 13% relapse. Something even
that was too small, and that was a really huge deal.
Yes, and it's continuing, and it continues. The other figure we have is actually showing up for appointments with your clinician. Again, a control group was a 30% no-show, and it's down to 7% no-shows.
Oh my goodness! That's an excellent rate.
And in mental health, a post-traumatic stress group, which is a combination of post-PTSD, substance use, and high-risk suicide, readmissions have been reduced 32%.
So think about things that are reducing readmissions. So if we can reduce readmissions, first of all, being in the hospital is really not the most fun thing. It's expensive. It's disruptive to people's lives. It's just not in the patient's best interest. It is difficult in terms of treatment. Anytime that my patient goes in the hospital, really treatment and our sort of long-term recovery trajectory sort of takes a bump, and it's not the best thing. It's expensive, and then, you know, if someone's in a bed who doesn't need to be in a bed, there are some people who legitimately really do need to be inpatient. And we want to have the beds for that, but if we can maintain somebody out, in many ways, everyone wins. So just on the strength of reducing readmissions, we talk about no-shows. I know from a DBT perspective, I talk a lot about something called therapy interfering behavior, and so therapy is the medicine. It's not your doctor's appointment with your primary care doctor is not the same as them prescribing a therapy. But in the case of mental health, your appointment in my office or telehealth appointment, that is the thing that helps you get better, the relationship with me. So anything that we do to reduce non-adherence with those therapy appointments, and I'm actually going to Apollo Health tomorrow to talk about therapy interfering behavior. Anything we do to reduce that increases the dose of the treatment that people get. So imagine that's getting an effective dose of an antibiotic versus taking your antibiotic sporadically and not at high enough dose so your infection doesn't ever go away. This really allows for that. So we're really dialing up the effectiveness of the medicine that we're giving people if we're using a technology tool. When we talk about therapy interfering behavior, we talk about that on the end of the patient, we talk about it on the end of the clinician, and we talk about it in terms of systemic interference. And one of the things that might be keeping people from attending appointments consistently is that folks with mental illness and addiction have a lot of things that get in the way of being at a place on time. Mm-hmm. But that is the only way to get the medicine. And so, Howard, talk a little bit about how LifeWIRE helps with that.
Really, because it's developing a different form of relationship between the clinician, this is observation, between the clinician and the patient. It changes the paradigm of the relationship and the value of coming in for an appointment with a therapist. Where depending on if it's just on a very static relationship, they got to come in for this appointment. There's lots of ways to create an excuse not to show up. If you actually have this ongoing relationship and dialogue that's enhanced by LifeWIRE, it becomes that much more difficult. In part because they're getting insights along the way. It's not just being in the office, but they're getting insights when they're not going for the therapy session. It just enhances when they have the therapy session. They know it's going to be that much more value to them. So you're getting little snippets along the way.
So, first of all, we're getting that therapeutic dose in between session.
Correct.
Which sort of amplifies that sort of connection to me. We may even be able to build in reminders. I'm going to get an alert that they're being inconsistent in a lot of ways and not attending my appointment. So I'm going to be able to reach out via text message. We know that when I'm trying to call somebody who has complicated mental illness, they tend to not pick up the phone. They may have they may be unemployed and bad finances, so the phone may not be turned on. They may be sleeping too much. They may be under the influence. They tend to not pick up. But they'll read the text message, which is, "You're not here. Are you okay? I miss you. Can you please call me? Can you get? And there may be other interventions that can be done as well. And I'm not going to go all Big Brother on you, but it could be, the phone buzzes and says it's really time for you to get in the shower. It's really time for you to get in the car. You really need to plan for traffic, so that all that executive functioning that would be needed to make it to the therapy appointment or help provide the therapy appointment via telemedicine, all of that starts to be possible and can be baked in. I think what Howard is saying that I think is interesting is that LifeWIRE is decided to be more than just a messaging system between therapist and client, but that we were going to start to collect data and try to generate insights and build interventions. I think, if I understand that right.
That's absolutely the case. And what's interesting is that we're fortunate and sorry that we're fortunate we have a lot of anecdotes as to how it's helped a lot of individuals. One example, without going into detail on the stories, with a high-risk suicide patient who just went dark one day. And as I mentioned, we measured non-responses. And it was a Sunday, and he didn't respond back. The trigger was 6 hours. And because of notification, everyone knew that he'd gone dark, and he wasn't responding. And they're trying to get hold of him. He couldn't respond for 3 days. They couldn't go to point their phone just to respond with 1, 2, or whatever the response was. On the Thursday, all of a sudden he calls up a clinician. Hey, how you doing? And it was a matter of, where were you? He said, well, I had a really tough time, but I knew by the messages that you all knew that I hadn't responded, and that was enough to keep me going to know you knew I wasn't responding. And I kept on getting, that particular individual got 3 reminder motivation messages, which was like, don't forget to hug your kids, a variety of things, that he just was looking forward to his messages every day because at least he knew something was coming in. And then the one on Thursday,
even when they're non-adherent with appointment, they can get something that is therapeutic, that is medicinal, even with non-adherence to the appointment, which is improving the outcomes of therapy with better design.
And draw them back in. Yeah.
Glenn, go ahead.
That's
you
great.
want to comment?
No, and draw them back in with something positive. I think that's brilliant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You got to be always pushing the positive, and just a reminder of that upside of it all. And it's amazing the value. In this particular case, it's interesting. As I mentioned, we have that outreach capability to buddies. It's been incredibly powerful for patients to know that there's that outreach, that they respond with a 5. I'm making up that number. Could be respond any way you want. Or that they're not responding, creates a trigger that lets their peer group know, all, again, permission-based, all opted in, that they know that they're feeling lousy. They can't tell them. They can't pick up the phone. They can't even text them or email them that they're feeling lousy.
Because they have a mental illness that causes them to not do that very thing that they need to do. Like,
exactly.
This is designed for people with the sicknesses that they're in treatment for.
Exactly.
It's designing for people who are healthy. You know, we designed the system for someone who's healthy, but that's not the user that you get.
Exactly.
Right, so this is really designed for a user who has an actual mental illness, who is in treatment for that, and that's what I just can't emphasize enough. Nurse Friendly, Andrew Lopez, who's been a longtime friend of the show and a longtime friend of mine on Twitter, says LifeWIRE is much like reminder calls to seniors to take their medicine, etc. That is certainly one thing that can be done, and the thing that I think that's interesting about this is that calling everybody is something that takes a lot of time. So if you have a technology tool that's sending those out automatically, especially if, is sending them out in a sensitive to behavior, that the behavior changes and the right reminder or the right information hits somebody when their behavior changes, like that's even more skillful, and an alert's done to the clinician. And that scales, because right now that amount of case management, we pay a lot of money for a human being to do, when the technology is perfectly capable of doing it.
And in this particular case, because it's responsive to the responses, think of the sort of the artificial intelligence elements behind it. So depending how a person responds to a message, it then sends a feedback, or in many cases you can actually do assessments, which are done. So depending how they respond, it'll ask a different question. Based on that question, it'll give a different question. So it's a huge sort of, I won't bore the details of the Boolean logic behind it all, but it takes however clinicians may want to take with an assessment, and it automates that as a friendly dialogue with the individual. So yes, you have a simple reminder, but the power is being responsive to those pieces and actually create this dialogue and pulling more information out of somebody.
Now, one of the things that somebody's mentioning is that if you built this in, that this could provide routines that are accompanying the patients. And what I'm going to say, again, from a DVT perspective, and so I'm often helping people who are really impaired with complicated diagnoses. They've been in other kinds of therapy. They've not gotten well. By the time you've gotten to me, you've not gotten well, and things are very bad. And so there's a DVT intervention called building structure. And so having structure and a caring relationship where there's coaching involved, you know, sort of in vivo in the moment, is very much a part of providing really effective therapy for someone who has not been getting better, who had the traditional once every week or two appointment where they talk for 50 minutes. If that wasn't cutting it, that intensity of responsiveness we know is really effective, and we know 80% of people who get that sort of DBT, that DBT therapy get well, and that sort of caring relationship that's responsive when you quit showing, that involves quick coaching, ease of access to your therapist, we know that that's really helpful. So yes, just a sort of in response to the Twitter stream. Hold on, sorry, I'm just getting in there. Someone said best tweet ever, and I'm trying to get to it. It was something that Tony Wood wrote. It's too far down. Never mind. Tony Wood did the one thing that it's a shame that that the data that we're using to drive marketing can't be used to improve people's health.
It's not just a shame; it's a crime.
Say it again. There you are, Tony. Say it again.
It's a crime that marketers can use our data, but then when we talk about using it for healthcare, everybody loses their mind.
And by the way, it's the exact same kind of data.
Same stuff. Same. I can sell shoes. I can sell you shoes, but I can't possibly help you get better faster.
Or save your life. So
no.
3,000 people a year are dying, and we can't. It's not that we can't. That we put up a lot of barriers. We make doing the research hard or developing the data insights hard. What I like about what Howard's saying is we're going to start collecting data on the wearables. Whereas in the last year, the buzz was it's just so far. We're so far from that. It's like just sort of this very weary. We're so far from that. And Howard's saying no. We're just gonna we're just gonna collect it.
Yeah. It's certainly not as far, but it's to your point, Tony, and to the early discussions. At the end of the day, I come from sort of the consumer side of things. And it's just like, what does the consumer say? What does the patient want to do? And that's the driver to a lot of these pieces.
Yes. Well, the patients all want me to text them. Let me tell you that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The pent-up demand for these kind of on-demand services is off the charts huge. It's just that our healthcare system isn't designed to deliver care that way.
And what we're trying to do, and actually another talk, because you opened it up earlier by saying what new technology we're doing. So another piece we're doing is, with working with clinicians, and it's all line of sight. Here's your patient group that you're dealing with, as you sort of said, April. But there's a lot of other people out there who have questions, have issues, have concerns, or maybe on the line as well. And so we've actually flipped our system where, yes, the clinician can have a dialogue with the patient, but we actually now have it where a patient or a new patient or prospective patient can initiate their own assessment and their own dialogue by themselves. Tied in with a clinical, so it's all clinical.
Wait, the patient can just say, I think this is going on, I want to double check it and shoot it past you, doc?
Essentially, they can create their own assessment that way. But, assessments that you
create. I'm totally thrilled, by the way, if my patient came and
take the assessment.
I've monitored my mood, I have some concerns, I'd like to discuss them with you. I'm like, oh my gosh, you are now favorite patient of the month.
Yeah. And in fact, you could say that triggers this kind of assessment, questions that you would have. They would actually respond to that, and you get sent that information, and then you can trigger whatever protocols you have for outreach or anything else.
So this is sounding eerily familiar, like something we've talked about before. That maybe anyone who's ever looked at like a startup book or something, like if you can measure something, you optimize what you measure for. So if only we could measure some of these things and be able to maintain some of them and see what these trends look like over time, maybe we could actually have better informed clinicians and better informed support all around. If only.
If only.
So I'm going to just slightly veer. I'm going to stay with this, but I'm going to get and one of these pillows is coming down. For those of you who don't know, I'm filming in a different location. I'm getting a new floor in my dining room. Things are happening, but back away from that. So let's talk a little bit about suicide. One of the things that we suspect but do not know and could know is that people seem to die by suicide after extended periods of poor sleep and really poor sleep in the days leading up to the suicide. There is some evidence to suggest that sort of suicide zone that is sort of like a glitch in your thinking and your behaving that is caused by a lot of illness and distress, and sleep is part of that disease process. We've not measured that. So how could wearables, what could we do with that data, for example, if we had wearable data about sleep? And I'm wondering if Glen and Howard could talk about, Howard is going to be collecting, with LifeWIRE, is going to be able to collect wearable data about sleep. Glen, What do we know about wearable data about sleep? I don't know if you know.
We have some of this data from our data helps as well that we've been collecting, and so there is definitely we have. I'm not going to share any new findings with you today because they're totally anecdotal, but there is some data that's coming in that certainly there is rich signal there, and so this is way better than having a sleep journal, of course.
Because, by the way, when you have a sleep journal, you come in with it, and it's like 2 weeks ago. I would love as a clinician, and I know that there are some patients out there occasionally tune in or watch, and they would agree. They would tell you I totally do this all the time. So if I have somebody who has been thinking about suicide, who has history of suicide attempt, not getting well in therapy, just started medication, has PTSD, for example. I serve veterans, and so we have a lot of people with PTSD, but honestly, a lot of my patients have very severe childhood trauma as well, and regular sleep is impaired. And what I let them know is, you have a night or two of bad sleep, that's one thing. You have more than a night or two, I want you on the phone telling me you're not sleeping, because we're going to take action to help you get sleep, because I don't think you're probably going to suicide if you've had a decent night's rest. And we'll do other things to keep you safe, but we will take your sleep very seriously. Another reason that I tell them this is, it turns out we talk about stigma in suicide prevention and mental health all the time. There is very little stigma associated with insomnia. You can go to your doctor and say, "Doc, I'm not sleeping." And there are all sorts of interventions, including cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is great. And all I need is, you're not sleeping, throw up the flag, put the bat signal up. I'll be right on that, because I think that reduces risk.
And it's exactly the sort of thing that they won't do because they're tired, because their cognitive functions are impaired. If only we had set up something that would perhaps let us know if they were not sleeping.
Yeah, I would
if only there was some technology.
Yeah, like, and so for example, if I've got somebody with a product like LifeWIRE and we're checking mood, and they also have a Fitbit or a wearable, and I find out they've had bad sleep for several nights, I'm going to be on the phone with them going, "You need to take a sick day from work. I know that that's really important. You need to get someone else to get the kids, and we need to come in and have a very serious conversation about your sleep." Additionally, that's when I can say, I can't promise the sleep's going to get better tomorrow, because when you start to not sleep with the insomnia, very similar to suicide risk, you begin to think it will never get better, I'll never sleep again. There's some bad cognitions associated with insomnia, and I can be right on top of that and say, I'm going to stick with you. I'm going to give you a number to call. We're going to give you things to do in the middle of the night. We may adjust your medication, or when you take your medication. Or, I know that you've been drinking those watermelon rock stars, Bart Andrews, but that's probably why you're waking up 3 or 4 times in the night and then can't go to sleep after 4:30. So we might have to give you, you might have to take some ibuprofen and just go into withdrawal from the rock stars.
And you didn't have to wait until the next appointment to figure that out.
Or the suicide attempt, or the drug relapse, or the hospitalization, which is often when I finally get the bat signal, which is really like when it's like finding out about stage 1 cancer versus stage 4 cancer. It's getting this when things are just so treatable and preventable versus when things have progressed and much damage has been done. Howard, thoughts about this? I apologize. It's so important. I just think
But that's exactly what we're talking about in terms of there's all these indicators that are out there that are sitting, if it's wearable, whatever the case may be, and we need to collect that and tie that in to get a better sense of what's happening. Some individuals, absolutely, maybe it is a sleep situation. Other individuals, maybe there's other indicators. But we don't know until we start at least getting the technology to collect the data so we can actually know what's out there.
We have several really cool tweets in the Twitter stream, and we only have a couple minutes left. I'm going to shout out a couple tweets and have us comment, and then we're going to do final thoughts, because unfortunately the hour has raced by and we are already there. First of all, Glen, CL Psych is coming up, and Chrissy Hollingshead Sites is talking about she and Jenna having a paper that must be germane to this that's going to be presented. Glen, can you just briefly talk about CL Psych and mention what you know about that paper?
I don't know that paper. I haven't read the papers yet, only the ones that I reviewed. That's for the plane right over there. So CL Psych is computational linguistics and clinical psychology. the two fields come together, and so all your natural language processing and statistical folks come together with the clinicians that are dealing with patients and doing research on the clinical side. And we meet for a day and exchange papers, and if it's a computer science paper that's presented, at the end of it a clinician gets up and speaks about it. And so our paper this year is on suicide, and Bart Andrews is going to get up and give us what for, and talk about the clinical relevance, like the direct clinical relevance of the research. So it's a really unique, I've never seen any other conference or workshop like it. So wicked cool, and they've been, CL Psych has been a long time interested in all the SPSM group as well. Like, you got a write fast enough?
Here. Like, we've had several CL Psych folks who are now SPSM alums. I'm sad that I'm not going to be there, but Tony's going to be there. Bart Andrews is already there. I mean, he's been traveling there. That's why he's not with us tonight. He's going to be one of the mental health commentators. So there will be some papers presented. Where can people catch the stream of that, Glenn?
That's a fantastic question. We'll post something on clpsych.org, and we'll certainly shove things out on hashtag SPSM and hashtag @CLPsych. Yep.
CL Psych. Is it CL Psych 16 or just CL Psych?
CL Psych. Same hashtag every year.
So there's going to be probably streaming. If Bart Andrews is going to be there, there's going to be tweeting. So there's going to be talking a lot about big data sets and mental health, and that is the place to get that if you want to get to that.
And
Howard,
I know for certain that there's at least 2 suicide papers that are there. I think there might even be more than that.
This is for those of you, we started SPSM because we strongly believe that there are people in many fields, not just at the 1 or 2 suicide prevention conferences that we go to, that are really creating information that could save lives, and our goal was to find a reasonable solution for reaching out to people and bringing them all sort of into one space. CL Psych has been fabulous. Do look at that, especially if you're interested in data and language and suicides. That is fascinating stuff. Howard, some thoughts about where people can stay up to date with what's going on with LifeWIRE?
Well, LifeWIRE, you can always go to our website, which is www.lifewiregroup.com, hashtag LifeWIRE, and the Twitter is LifeWIRE Connect.
Howard, you guys don't collect any language data, do you?
Language in terms of what?
I don't know, ask Glenn. He's the expert.
Well, in terms of language, what we do for language, which is interesting, maybe it's the use of language, is we actually measure how people respond based on the mode of communication. So using the same language, the same populations, people respond very differently, whether they're using interactive voice recognition, whether they're using email, whether text messaging, instant messaging. You'll get different responses, though using the same exact language with the same population. So language, my interpretation, is the use of language is really important, where, to quote a great Canadian, Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. The form of communication affects responses. And so you have to be not only aware of the language you're using, but as how you're using the language.
There's signals all over the place.
What?
That's a couple of them. There are signals all over the place in language. It's a great lens for looking at mental health.
And we're able to measure that. And we have been measuring that.
So I want you guys to be aware that our data, how we use it, the language we use, the mode that we're on, all these could create different and valid signals for measuring current functioning, healthcare, all those things. And that's really important because we're not doing it, but we're only doing a little, but it's entirely possible. We could do it a lot in ways to save lives. Tony Wood, I know that you're on mute. Can you come on and give us any final thoughts before we close ourselves out for tonight?
Suicide prevention is a good idea. How about that?
No kidding, right?
Get out there and do it. We can't do enough of it. Do it however you can bring yourself to do it. Anything? No?
No, and you're going to be tweeting out at CL Psych. You're going to be tweeting out at CL Psych.
Yes, I'll be tweeting at CL Psych like a grown-up, and I'll stop being a goofball. Yes, the amazing new things coming. All of this technology headed right in our direction. If we miss this target, it's our fault. There are lives to save. We need to get on doing it.
That should be SPSM quotes. I'm at Doc Foreman. I'm going to wrap up our last live stream using Hangouts of Season 3. Please do follow us on Facebook, hashtag SPSM for our closeout blab for next week. There are going to be plenty of content with SPSM Summer. I think the SPSM is unpacked for tonight is canceled. We have a lot of folks in the air traveling around tonight. My last thought is going to be, I know that we've bookended Orlando. This is one of those, I don't want to lose momentum on the science because I believe that the science ultimately gets us out of the mess, but I don't want to forget that what we don't understand about human behavior is killing us. Sometimes in these very horrific tragedies, but there is a common everyday tragedy. We're losing a 747 full of people to suicide every day, 43,000 a year, and we're losing them because we don't understand how to do suicide prevention better. We are currently drowning in studies that say that our intervention methods at scale very rarely are turning out to greatly impact the mortality rates, and they're only these sort of things. You know, we have some great zero suicide research and some small areas of promise. But we think that innovation is the way out of these tragedies. I'm really grateful for friends like Howard Rosen, who says, I didn't know that we couldn't do it, so I just did it because no one told me it was scary. And I'm really grateful for people like Dr. Glen Coppersmith, who says, there is signal, and the signal is all around us, and we can understand it, and we can learn things quickly that we didn't know before. I'm grateful for pals like Tony Wood and Bart Andrews who show up every week and help me understand what I'm doing and make sure that all of this works so that we can bring the information to all of you. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the people who believe in this so much that they create their own channels and their own content. Please do stay close with SPSM. We will be returning in the fall. We have a really cool opening guest, Chelsea Booth, who's going to be talking about ways that you can look at suicide databases for the United States in terms of big public health stuff. So you can understand what works about those databases and what does not work. And then, of course, we're ending with Howard Rosen and Glen Coppersmith talking about ways that we're building new databases, which was on purpose. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Please do have a great week and stay in touch, everyone. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a great summer.
Bye-bye.